Okay, I think if we're all settled, we can go ahead and get started. Welcome everybody to the first session in the main stage. This is Art and Social Commentary. My name is Jackie DeRuyter, and I'm going to facilitate the discussion today. Before I introduce our panel, I just wanted to quickly say a word about our intention for this session. We really wanted to talk about art as an agent for social change or social commentary. We know art is very flexible in its utility. We can use it as an escape from everyday life, and we can use it as a way to kind of shield ourselves from some of the turmoil that surrounds us. Conversely, and I think that this is more powerful, we can use it as a way to confront those issues head on. And I think that that's what we're really interested in talking about today. And I loved what Elisa said this morning about using art as a catalyst for social change. I think that's really important, that that's what we want to focus on today. So to that end, our goal was to invite artists working in different mediums to come and talk about their experience. And we think that we were successful in getting a very diverse panel together, so I'll introduce them now. First, we have Joe Diggs. Joe is a visual artist, a painter. His studio is in Osterville. We have Tim McCarthy, who is a gay video historian, and he lives in Truro, but works around the world. He says in 93 countries, so he'll elaborate on that a bit. And finally, we have Allison Weller, and Allison is an actor, a writer, a playwright, and a producer, and she lives in Orleans. So I will start with Joe, and if you'd like to spend, the way we're going to work the session is each will spend, roughly about 10 minutes with some background introductory information, then we'll open it up for some more in-depth conversation. So. And this is the clicker.
Good morning. Whoa. Yeah. My name's Joe Diggs, Osterville artist, and let me see if I can get myself comfortable here, halfway. There we go. A little background on my art career. Barnstable High graduate. I went from there to Southeastern Mass University up in North Dartmouth. I graduated with the undergraduate degree there. Went out, worked for a little while, came back, got my master's degree at Mass College of Fine Art. It was actually the low residency program up in Provincetown, which gave me the opportunity to come back here and work. I want to start off with this piece because this is actually kind of a little bit in the chronological order. My style of painting, or excuse me, what I've developed into my style of painting has been a total reflection of just my life and ups and downs, tragedies, and working through personal problems. This piece was a piece that was developed, it's called Mendocino. I actually painted this after I came back from asking my wife, who I was married to for a year, for a divorce. And that's how this thing kind of started. To retract a little bit, the reason why, like I said, this is a personal travel that my art represents. It came from a spot where, when I was first introduced to art, was in high school. I was following my older brother, and he was an artist. And after he passed away, my sophomore year, he died when he was 19, I was 16. It was the one connection that I had, and I decided, well, this is the way I'm going to continue. It gave me a chance, as Jackie said earlier, it gave me a chance to kind of heal myself and at the same time still feel connected with him, which made me realize the power of art. And thank God I had a great education from Barnstable High School. The program was incredible, and it continues to be incredible to this day because of great teachers. So that gave me a voice. It was a voice that I didn't have, and it's a voice that I'm still working on till today, and I guess I'll work on for the rest of my life. That's just the process of what I deal with. This piece is called Grandma. This is my grandmother. Kind of after she passed away, I did this series of paintings where it really doesn't connect with their total physical being, but it just reminds me of that wonderful place that she always brought me to. After Trayvon died, of course, this is a piece after Trayvon. It's called Self-Portrait because I did it at the time, but I wasn't really thinking about trying to do an homage to him. I just was really kind of trying to work through, these social issues that we're dealing with in our country. These circles that are floating are pieces that I continue to carry on from James Byrd Jr. when he got dragged to death in Jasper, Texas. I don't understand these atrocities anymore in life. I just think at this point we should be all beyond this and we should be able to move forward. But unfortunately, it seems as though history is there for a reason for us to keep bringing us back instead of moving us forward. So there's some things that we need to correct, but hopefully in time we'll have a chance to talk about this. This piece is called Independence Day. I did this after myself and a good buddy of mine and his grandson went to Aquinnah over in Martha's Vineyard, where it was one of the first places where African Americans were allowed to buy homes. And a lot of people don't know that, but you know, we here in this little corner of southeastern Massachusetts have a lot to do with African and Cape Verdean culture. And for that reason, it's given us opportunities that were really historical, in the front of the historical movement in a lot of things. So come 4th of July, every 4th of July over in Martha's Vineyard, it's always been a large African-American gathering. This painting talks about that gathering. So you see the red, white, and blue. It was actually in Aquinnah where the Wampanoags are known to take the clay, natural clay from the area, and wipe it all over yourself, sit in the sun, bake a little while, get your skin nice and soft, jump in the water, clean it off. So we're all mudded up. And so this is Independence Day on Martha's Vineyard. Chalkline baller. After going through some photographs in my father's yearbook, I ran across a photograph of this gentleman playing baseball. And I remembered after I graduated from undergraduate, I moved on and was a flight attendant for 15 years and lived in Pittsburgh. And I recalled it brought me back to this situation where I was getting my hair cut. And the guy was telling me how the Negro Leagues, because they had 2 teams in Pittsburgh at the time, how the Negro Leagues basically funded the minority neighborhoods. And then looking at the neighborhood and it's kind of just in its disheveled sense that it is now, I was like, you could see that by moving the Negro League out of Pittsburgh, how highly it affected the community. And so that's why he's chalk-lined. And once again, the circles come back to James Byrd Jr. and drag death. This is called Joe's Team. My grandfather owned a bar. He was a great businessman, local businessman. This is a bad photograph of a painting that I like a lot. That's an inlay of an X-ray. So it's just for you to kind of look a little bit more in depth at the situation. So I do little tricks like that. This is also on the bar theme. This is the bar itself. Can I use the ladies' room? We would have a line of people waiting to get into the bar, and of course that was the way that the ladies wanted to get in. They're like, can I use the ladies' room? And of course we couldn't find them if they went to the ladies' room, so this is my little poking fun at the line of people and the gold in the interior of the bar itself. This is Joe's. This is the bar itself that my grandfather built that I was fortunate to run. It's called Joe's Boarded Up. The business is no longer in operation. So this is once again about me going through my changes, reflections, just throwing it out to the audience to let them know how I go through my changes. These are a couple of pieces that are showing right now over at Berta Walker Galleries in Provincetown. A couple of abstractions. This is really where I would hope that my art and everything would lend. The stories of pain that I constantly put out is who I am. But the other side of it is that at some point in life, I would hope that these would be the ones that would actually merit the art instead of the historical stuff that tends to make us regurgitate why instead of moving forward into what we need to move to. Another piece, this is called The Nap. This is under my bed right now. I guess I have a couple more minutes. I should have waited for the clap, but I really don't have a whole lot more to say instead waiting for the conversation to happen so that we can get into the conversation, because I think the conversation is important, and I think it's important for these incredible artists to get their chance. So I'll just pass it on. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Joe. I really appreciate that. Well, Joe sets it up perfectly for me, because what he just did was he told stories about himself and the reasons why his work exists, the stories behind that. because that's what it means to be a human being. It's stories. That's the entirety of our existence. And every single art, from music to poetry, from books to film, dance, theater, all of them are about telling a human being another story about a human being. Because it shows us how to be and how not to be. That's why Shakespeare still is relevant these days, right? I mean, so for me, I was diagnosed with HIV and AIDS in 1988. And the last thing in the world I wanted to do was to die without knowing who I was. I was determined to find out who I was as a gay man before I died. And there's only one way I could figure that out, was to go to non-American, non-capitalists, non-Christian places and see if my people existed. Because in my time, in the 1980s, and still to this day, the anti-gay, the homophobia is just obviously still present. It was even more so then. So I've been to 93 countries and all 7 continents. Because it's become a medicine for me. It certainly kept me alive. I didn't start to do the HIV drugs until 7 years ago. My art transformed my own life. But while I was on that incredibly selfish journey, I realized I had the opportunity to create an altruistic gift, something that I could leave behind for my sisters and brothers 100 years from now. Because since I've been doing this in 1990, when I got my first camera, this has been the time of firsts for my people around the world. And I've got over 15,000 hours of videotape. Really, really a valuable gift to leave future generations. But for myself, it was the medicine, because it showed me that I was valuable. I came from a people that was rich in culture, rich in contribution to the human race. It was only the Christian point of view that my country was under the guise of that really sliced into me and really hurt me. And AIDS, obviously, and the gay rights movement, gay marriage, have shown people who we really are. So behind all art has to be the activist mindset. Those stories are crafted and told to change your mind. They're not done accidentally. That's what Joe just told you. It was very intentional what he did. So if we open ourselves up to that intention, we too can change. Again, why Shakespeare is still relevant these days? Because it shows us how to be and not to be a human being. My art focuses on that. I'll leave you with one last thing. You can tell that I feel energized by my story and by the things that I do. And if you feel energized by your life, if you feel connected, if you feel valuable, then you're going to create art yourself. You're here today because you are artists and you are activists, simply by your presence. I just want to confirm that with you guys. And that we can take that forward and change the world, because we have changed the world. We have changed the world. Gay and AIDS. And I'm also a cannabis activist here on Cape Cod. Another issue that really needs to be changed. But those are the things that I find enlivening. I don't find them problematic. They draw me into life. They don't make me want to run away. I want to engage. That's what an artist does. And if you look at quantum physics, I know it's a real switch, but quantum physics, one of the basic rules is everything is there and not there at exactly the same time. The only time it becomes one or the other is when you make it happen, when you concentrate on it. And that's what an artist does. Magic out of nothing. Thank you very much.
That was awesome. I don't know what to say. So I'm Allison Weller, and thank you. You said so many things that are relevant, and I would concur that not only are all of you artists, but everybody has stories to tell. Everybody has their own story, and everybody's story is probably more interesting than they think it is. And a lot of the work that I've done has been based on that kind of notion. I guess a little bit about myself. I grew up in suburban New Jersey. My parents took me to theater a lot as a kid, and so I went to Broadway plays and mostly musicals. But I grew up in a family of writers and people who really valued inquiry and curiosity. There was a writer on my dad's side of the family who was one of the first journalists to go into Nagasaki after the war. My mom helped Cornelius Ryan research The Longest Day. And so I think I just grew up, I don't know if it's in my DNA or just being the nurture thing of being in a house where a sense of history and sort of inquiry was important. So I studied history and literature in college while doing a lot of plays, and what I came to know, I don't think I even knew what dramaturgy was then, but I realize now that history and literature is always sort of like the foundation around what we build theater as, right, or on top of. And I found myself, after getting an MFA in acting at the University of California in San Diego, in a theater company that had been started by somebody at my school who was sort of taking the ball of documentary theater and running it with it. And so he started this company. I got out of grad school in 2001 in May, moved to the corner of Fulton and Gold Street, 5 blocks from the World Trade Center, was getting married in November. And my fiance and I were both working at the Embassy Suites Hotel across from the World Financial Center. We were here for a tasting for our wedding on September 11th. And so obviously the world changed, everything about the world, everything, what we thought about theater and what it meant, and will we be able to make theater anymore, you know, got turned on its head. And my friend Steve decided that he wanted to make a play that was in response to that happening, but that was not about it or about people dying, but somehow dealt with the sense of loss that we were having in New York City at the time. And so my work with the civilians started with this play called Gone Missing, which was about that. And we interviewed people about things that they had lost. They had to be items, not people. And it turned into this really cathartic experience for everybody involved. And it seemed to be cathartic for the audience members too, in that it helped them sort of navigate their feelings of loss and nostalgia. And the other thing about it was there was music involved. So usually when people think of documentary theater, they think, you know, just people standing there sort of like pontificating, but we had music to sort of elevate these dramatic moments and help us with more creative ways to sort of engage people and feel things on a more visceral level. Anywho, that was an amazing experience. I then worked on a show called This Beautiful City, which was also with the civilians. We went to Colorado Springs, Colorado to talk to people about being evangelical Christians. And when we were there, I know, I knew you. Oh, we have a lot to talk about. And while we were there, a huge scandal actually broke out. Ted Haggard, who was one of the biggest pastors of the biggest mega church in Colorado Springs, who had been on George W. Bush's call list, was outed by a male prostitute for seeing him and doing meth. And this happened right before we were going to go sit down in Colorado Springs for 5 weeks. And so that was a life-changing experience working on that show as well, because we were, everybody knew that we were these liberal New Yorkers. And we had to sort of take a moment and be neutral as we interviewed people from all over the political and social spectrum there. Which is to say that while all of this is going on, Cape Cod has been a foundation for me in my life. I have a very long-standing relationship with Cape Rep Theater in Brewster. I started working there when I was 19. And so a couple years ago, I suggested to Janine Perry that we do a civilians kind of show, talking to people in the fishing community about what goes on in the fishing industry on Cape Cod, because I realized I had never really talked to a fisherman. I didn't really know where the fish on my plate came from, and if there were those questions in my mind, then there certainly must be other people who had similar questions who were on the Cape. And so that led to this play called Boundless, which happened at Cape Rep last fall. And it too was a life-changing experience, partly because it's an amazing thing to realize that everybody has a story, and that is when you start digging into these subjects, the world sort of opens up and reopens up again. So inquiry, empathy, conversation, and then understanding is sort of how I feel this kind of theater works. And I don't know if social commentary is really what it is, but it can lead to social change, for sure. And I don't know where we're at time-wise, but I think I'm teaching a class in documentary theater at the New School in New York City right now. We just had a class about the Laramie. I don't know if any of you know about the Laramie Project, but it was the anniversary of Matthew Shepard dying, the 20th anniversary last week, and we had an amazing class talking about that. And you know, I think the play actually really helped lead to the anti-hate legislation that happened under the Obama administration and stuff like that. So we can talk about all of that more. But I have brought Peter Hodgson, who is my friend and a brilliant composer who helped write music for Boundless, and he is going to sing the titular song from the play for you, which basically was our attempt at trying to distill all of the complications that people in the fishing industry and the scientists face all the time into one song. It's sort of like one musing on it all. I don't know if Peter's there.
We have this idea, abundance, you know, based on what used to be there and what's out there now. And that's based on how long you've lived here and how long you've fished here and the cycles you've seen and how you perceive the world around you, or at least the fishing. Yeah. Abundance. There could be less fish, yeah, that could be it. Overfished for sure, but that's a touchy subject. Some say that the scientists screwed up the way they measured the fish, and so it seems like the cod are gone. That's wishful thinking if you ask me. These fish have a tendency to up and leave with no warning, off to a boundless number of places. How rude. And so their numbers plummet, catches plummet, profits plummet, families. But here's the thing. When they breed, it's this beautiful and ancient choreographed dance. And if you interrupt it, they scatter and fail to bring another generation into the world. The slightest shift in circumstance makes it feel like the whole world is left to chance. Did they die? Or were they chased away by sharks or seals? Or pushed out by the warming waters? That last one, I think that last one hurts the most. Because the thought that creeps into someone's head is, was this our fault? Was this our fault? So the questions keep flooding in. How much can we spare? How much can we protect? Can we nurse it back to health just to use it up again? Can we keep a family together? Can we provide? Can we just live without the uncertainty? The constant worry that maybe today, maybe tomorrow, the fish will be gone. Those questions, that fear, boundless.
Thank you, Peter. That was wonderful. So thank you, everyone, for that quick introduction. I know that there's so much more to talk about. I do have questions for you, but I thought maybe first we could start opening it up to the audience, and hopefully your introductions triggered some thoughts that you all might be having and questions you'd like to answer. And I mean, have answered. I'll come around with the microphone so that we can be sure to hear everybody.
Just wanted to say, Tim, a person grew up in the 50s and with Lenny Bruce and Norman Mailer and James Baldwin, and your approach, I won't even characterize it, just reminds me of them. We're missing that edge, you know, that we used to have with social commentary, humor, dark humor. T.J. Cole reminds me of James Baldwin. He writes with the same voice, and I just really appreciate your passion and your anger. That was very kind. Thank you.
I couldn't think of anybody else? Okay. Just, Joe, I had a question for you. One of the things I learned about you is that you were born in France, yes, into a military family, right. And that earlier on in life you also worked as a flight attendant, right, for a period of time. So I found that very interesting that you probably traveled around quite a bit, saw a lot of different locations, right, and different cultures. And I'm just curious how that might have informed the way you approach your work. Maybe that early exposure made you more likely to be an observational artist and more likely to address some of these issues in your art.
Jack, I think so. You know, it's one of those, you know, when you were young and, you know, I didn't have any control over where we were going. At the time, it didn't make sense. But now I look at my approach as a lot more international, a lot more worldly, a more global approach than I do a regional approach. It's an odd situation though. It means we still deal within our own neighborhoods and our own regional issues. So here we are in Cape Cod, but yeah, my vision is much more large than probably someone who didn't have the opportunities that I had with actual travel. The flight attendant part was you know, I actually, when I graduated from my undergraduate, I was trying to figure out how to see more so that I could educate my art. And so that was the reason to get the job. And I was fortunate enough to get the job, and therefore I traveled and I got a chance to see, you know, all the places, or most of the places that artists need to go and see to you know, feel that you have the, you know, background to go forward.
How many years did you do that for?
15 years, yeah, and that's when I realized that by the 15th year that I hadn't gone to see a few of the places that I was planning on doing in 5. So it's time to move on, and, you know, and here we are. I mean, art has a way, I think, of choosing us, and I'm sure it's happened to everybody here. At some point, there's a line that it says to you, you pay attention to me because I'm important. And I think that us as real artists, we follow that line. It's an intuitive kind of process that you have to believe in yourself, but you also believe in what you're about. And the education that I got was probably the education for me personally. I mean, we're all individual artists, and that's what makes this thing so incredible, that we all have our own point of views in which we're trying to get out, but more importantly, that there are ours. And then we're collectively, you know, we can look at each other's differences and our likenesses collectively. And I think that's kind of what the traveling experience taught me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious to know if the current political climate has impacted the work you're currently doing or thinking about, and to that end, is there a sense of urgency you have about getting it out there and how you think about that?
That's loaded, Dave. Yeah. Yes, it is. It's unfortunate. And I say it's unfortunate because for me personally, I see this administration, this political atmosphere that we have as just being a continuation of what's always happened in our society. I don't think this is any different than anybody else. Everybody's like, oh, it's something new just because it's more blatant. But this is nothing more, and I was talking to a lady earlier today, from how I look at today's political structures, this is nothing more than after they hung slaves, what they used to do is they cut them off the hang, and then they would put them on the back of a buggy or a horse and drag them through town. And after they dragged them through town, so everybody got to see the corpse and understand, you ever do this again, there's prices to be paid. Then they'd skin the slave, and then they'd put the skin on top of their buggy or whatever and drive that through the neighborhood again. And that would just stay on the card. That way people knew, you know. In our country, I don't think we were ready for a black president personally, the first time. I mean, I think he did a great job, but I think there was a part of our country that wasn't used to it or didn't want it to happen. And then beautifully, or because I say it's beautifully because change always comes with conflict, I think now what we're seeing is the dragging of the corpse. Now, you know, so all of you get the idea. Don't do this again. You don't bump up against the system. You bump up against the system, there's going to be costs, there's going to be a price to pay. It's not going to be short, it's going to be long. I've got a mom, I pay attention to her, we have breakfast every morning. She's 86 years old. We sit and we watch the same commercials every day. And I go, Mom, you're not afraid of falling and not getting up, are you? And she says, what do you mean, honey? Because they know we see this every single day, because these people understand that you're watching this. You know that, Mom. She says, I know, honey. I'm okay. I'm like, understand. We're all here for you. You don't have to fall in this. They know who you are. We know who you are. This system is a system. They know everything about all of us, and you know, whether you're gay, whether you're straight, whether you're black, whether you're white. So this system, I just feel like right now what we're really seeing is something that I've already been painting about, David. This isn't new to me. This is the same old. And that's kind of what I was saying about the Berta Walker pieces, is it's my dream that I no longer have to carry this burden and bring it to you people, because the truth of it all is you've seen it before. We've dealt with this. Let's move forward. Let's see what the new art is going to be. Let's see what we are, the new people that we are going to be. Because the truth is we keep listening to the left and the right, which are the same, we're going to end up just following that same circle over and over again, and we'll be back here talking about the same situations, just with a little tweak on it.
That's a great question, David, and I'm wondering if Allison and Tim want to weigh on it as well.
Okay, yes. The present political situation. I have two focuses in my life, cannabis and gay rights. But gay rights are really well underway, obviously, in the United States, so it's not really my focus. Again, I mentioned I cohabitate with HIV. Well, I got the brilliant idea that I would take my HIV back to its homeland, that I would go to Africa, where it first showed up in the human race, and look at how the people there deal with it. Because obviously, and this is, the country is Uganda, in southern Uganda, it was under Idi Amin that the plague really reached a critical mass and came around the world to my body. But in Uganda, of course, they don't have the technology. They had no drugs. And we ourselves didn't have any drugs until 96, and I was in Uganda in 99. I'm more thoughtful about how our minds really interact with the world. As I said a moment ago about quantum physics, when we concentrate on something, we make that so. So I had the brilliant idea that I was going to go to Africa and I was going to talk with the traditional healers, AKA witch doctors. Because fundamentally, that is the front line of healthcare in Africa. And what do? They work with the mind. Yes, they absolutely utilize herbs as well. So they're not totally in the mind, but they really trick your mind, just like our doctors do, right? You go to your doctor, and she thinks that you have this certain disease, and she tells you to take this pill, and you do, and it's a sugar pill, but it worked. And that's the placebo effect. Every drug commercial you see on the television, placebo effect is a component. Well, I'll tell you right now, if a doctor can tell you to heal yourself, then a doctor can tell you to kill yourself. They tell you there's no hope. They tell you there's nothing out there for you, and you just better get ready to die, because that's what the bastards told me. They gave up, all right? So I understood that the opposite of placebo is a concept called nocebo. And our society, on a general and an individual level, practices placebo and nocebo. And it's back to what Joe was saying. The story is where that is. And where you are placed in that story, that's how you get to see whether you are at the effect of placebo or nocebo. Are you something acceptable in society, or are you not? Women making up more than the majority of us. You guys don't have the same kind of respect. What kind of nocebo don't you hear every single day? And especially now, right? Come on. Past month, horrific. That's what an artist's job is to do. And it's never done. Like Joe said, it's not. Come on. The second we think that it's over with, that's when you get screwed the worst. And that's what happened. Because I don't care who voted for him. That's not my problem. My problem is who did not vote. That's the solution. That's where we should be concentrating on. It's those people that think that their vote doesn't matter, that they have nothing to lose. We have to create stories that show them they lost. We have to create stories that empower them and show them that their vote does matter. Because that's really what the world is about. Engagement. And you do so if you're valuable in the world around you. So
right after the election, Steve Costin, who's the artistic director of the Civilians, called sort of oh my gosh, we need to immediately have a meeting to talk about how are we going to engage and try to help, what is art going to do to, respond to what's happening in the country right now. And that was interesting. And honestly, I don't, because I've been here during that time period, I'm not sure, to be honest, what the company is doing. I don't think they're working on a show particularly about it. But what I have been thinking about lately is the fact that when we went to Colorado Springs, we thought the country was as divided as it could get, and that was 10 years ago. So I would love to do something similar that brought, I don't know how this would be constructed, that would bring people who are from deeply red states and people from deeply blue states, if not necessarily together in some kind of theatrical performance, but there's a group called Narrative 4 in New York that brings people together and actually forces them to interview each other, which is a process that we use in the Civilians, and then forces them to actually act each other to each other, the story that they just heard. And it's all about empathy and listening. I think so much of this is about people sitting in a room together and talking and actually looking each other in the eye, because I just feel like we're so attached to screens and trolling and all this kind of thing. There's a real alchemy in a room when you're, breathing the same air as another person and you're hearing their story. And then when you have to tell it also, there's a thing that happens, and you sort of have to, at least for a moment, feel what that feels like. There was an amazing article, which you might want to Google, in New York Magazine about Narrative 4, where they took victims of gun violence and gun advocates, and they did this process with them, and it's an amazing article. And I don't know what the answer is. Then we're also thinking about writing a musical that would be a silly, a humorous sort of take on a town that's tearing itself apart. But partly because I don't know, I feel I've been so depressed for the past couple of years that I feel like humor also is a necessary, absolutely necessary weapon in this kind of scenario. But
so when Joseph Papp founds the Public Theater, he decides that the work is so important that versus staging it in the church where they've always been, he gets a flatbed truck, drives it out to the boroughs, parks it, and does Shakespeare for people who would not come into the city and see Shakespeare. I think of Joan Baez and Bob Dylan and these people who created amazing art that spoke of our time and spoke of these social issues, but in some ways was for their audience. So taking that a step further and building on Joe Papp, what do you do to take your message to the audience that needs to hear it, not the audience that already is eager for it?
Okay, so 99, I took my HIV back to its homeland in Uganda and created my first film, Nocebo Equals Christian Witchcraft. A Healing Ritual was the title, or is the title of it. And it changed my life, it healed me, and really had the profound impact that I wanted. So I promised someday that I would go back and I would help Uganda. I would find a way to give hope and healing to Uganda as a thank you. Well, I didn't have to wait but a decade. Then some son of a bitch, Pastor Scott Lively from Springfield, Massachusetts. Yes, this is the man who ran against Governor Baker for the Republican nomination. He was guaranteed a seat in that race by the Republican Party of this state. He has gone to Uganda and taught the parliament there that we are child rapists. We're here to exploit their children, and got them to pass what's called the Kill the Gays bill. And as a filmmaker, I realized what I could do is I could go to Uganda and I could give them the skills. I could teach them how to use a video camera. I could teach them how to use a computer. I could teach them how to edit a story and allow them to tell a story in their own way. Because Ugandans, like everyone, know how to tell their own stories. I don't know that, but I do have a skill that I can give them, a technology that will allow them to exponentially reach out. And we've just completed that film. And that is really one of the best ways I too know how to reach out and heal myself. Because honestly, I'm a selfish son of a bitch. Let's tell the truth. I do this because this is good for me. And yes, my God, thankfully, it's good for others. And why shouldn't you be in that kind of virtuous cycle? And that's what I think art creates.
Yeah, Tim. I'm basically jumping right on his back and riding that pony. I create work. It's hard to get it out to social media. I do it. I try to get as much of it out. Am I reaching an audience beyond my audience? Am I actually getting there? I don't know. Is that a thought that I need to go through? Maybe. But I think my job as an artist is to create the best work that I can possibly make and put it out in the world and let the world accept it or not accept it. That's not really my job. It's hard enough to do what I'm doing. And it's a selfish, personal point of view that you're exposing yourself to the world and hoping that they can pick up what you're putting down. If they can't pick up what you're putting down, then you're unsuccessful. And then it comes down to whether you can survive off of knowing whether that you aren't reaching the masses the way that you want to. Personally, if I can't, I continue to create. I'm a maker. So I make things, and if my audience or the audiences that I like to meet never gets to see it, then they just unfortunately don't.
I would just say, in the kind of work I do, I mean, I think having talkbacks and having an opportunity to and trying to reach out and get as many people to these shows that you can from across a spectrum of the community and engage them in conversation actively afterwards is the best way to, and then have them, I hope, go out and engage other people in conversation as well. And also teaching. I mean, I'm finding this year that it's really inspiring, and I feel more of a mission about it than I did before, I think because of what's been going on, to try to really instill in my students a real understanding of why listening is so important and what those skills are in being an active listener, and to bring those out and I hope they engage in a way that causes people to ask questions about their mindsets, if that makes any sense. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, I just wanted to jump on that really quick. Hi, I'm Peter. I'm not part of this panel, but whatever. No, I think looking specifically at the art that I create, which I was trained as a musical theater writer, I think a lot of it is also you can use theater, and especially musical theater, as a Trojan horse in a lot of ways. Which is not to say you want to be deceptive towards an audience, but one of the shows I'm working on deals with the amazing story of Emily Roebling, who helped build the Brooklyn Bridge. And she was a woman in the late 1800s who ran a worksite on the biggest project in the world for 10 years. And I went into it with two of my female classmates talking about that. And our goal wasn't to say men versus women. That was never the idea. But by telling the story and wrapping it in a way that is accessible, because people love music, if you can wrap it in a way that's accessible and not try to hit the audience over the head with a message, a lot of times you can leave an audience going, wow, that woman was amazing. And then you have people who would never say those words actually say, wow, that woman was amazing. And through that, it's just these little seeds that get planted that say, like, in that case, like, oh my God, they did so much and they stood up to so much adversity. And it's not truly about, it's not truly about spouting the message of it. It's simply telling, like, they're amazing people. And it's been throughout history. And through musical theater, I think you can make people pay attention to that. Sure.
I agree with that. I totally, and I guess thinking a little bit more about the question, what I have done in some of them, I was taught by a few mentors that said if you want to get your message across, you don't always have to club them in the head, with your message. One of Keith Washington, an incredible painter, Mass Art professor, does these lovely renditions of landscapes, and you look at these landscapes and you say, well, these are incredible landscapes. So I guess anybody who's a landscape appreciator would look at it, but then when you read the title, this is where John Smith got hung in 1980 or 1960 or 1970. Well, it doesn't matter because it's still happening to today. And he goes and he researches these places, he makes these paintings, and I have brought that element into my work now that might backdoor you somewhat into actually understanding what I am if you have the time, patience, or the intelligence to pick it up. If you don't, then you just miss it. But that's kind of what I was saying. We make it. It doesn't mean that it does get picked up or understood. In my world, the visual world, it I think is a different language, and therefore it's a different set of issues.
I would just say on that too, like in most of the investigative plays that I've done, there's been a discussion about whether to land on a side of the political spectrum, and usually a conscious effort just to present people's stories in as authentic way as possible, to kind of put your own political thing aside, and through the authentic storytelling of actual words from actual people, those realizations that everybody here is talking about come up, and people do start to question what they thought before, and that's sort of the process that happens, and it's by presenting many voices, and perhaps voices that people haven't actually really heard or listened to before, and they do for some reason in a theater.
Well, actually, that's really what the heart of the film is that I developed with the Ugandans. I'm obsessed with asking people the simple question, please complete the following sentence, see me as. The world always tells you how it sees you, but when does it ever ask you how you want to be seen? It asks you your name, but your name's not who you are. So for me, that was the question we asked all the Ugandans. And the film is titled See Me As, because over there again, the idea is that we have horns, that we're something that we're not. So all we're doing is presenting people in their very basic lives, doing the very simple jobs that they do, having the relationships that they do, so as to desensitize people in Uganda, because they've really been told the story, without a doubt. So there is so much that's possible when you really open up to people and let people really talk about themselves and be authentic, because that's the key word. You'll listen to anything as long as you believe it's authentic. The second you think it's shit, it's probably because you don't think it's authentic.
Hi, my name is Judy Laster. I run the Woods Hole Film Festival, and one of the things that we've been doing for a long time, following up on what each of you has spoken about, our motto has been bringing the world to your doorstep, one film at a time, with the thinking that, we're not taking a side on the films, but we want to give people, at least in our audience, the opportunity to see something they might not ever have a chance to see otherwise. And having them be able to have an experience that might help them think differently or reaffirm how they think about their own lives. And so I applaud, what each of you is doing to bring your stories to life. My question is, in this day and age of social media, where things move so quickly and expectations of what, how stories are told are so, in some cases, unrealistic in terms of the amount of time we give things to unfold. How does that affect what you're doing or how you think about what you're doing, and how can we all, as artists or people who support artists, sort of push back on the rushing tide to slow things down a little bit, to give ideas time to germinate and to unfold?
I have the microphone. I don't know. I think one thing, Judy, I apologize, because I think this is a question that takes a little bit of time to think about a little bit before you just start spewing, but I think the other side of it is that as artists, we don't deal in now time anyways. Time is one of those things that we fragment and play with. So the idea of actually being a real-time artist, really kind of like reacting off of what social media or what's really happening right now, I think that we've already done that. It's a weird thing. I think that we're ahead at the same time that we live in behind. Time is an amoeba for artists. I think the great artists find a way to take all times and find a way to make their own language out of all of the timing issues. So I'm passing the mic.
I'm sorry, but I disagree with you, Judy. I don't think that the issue should be to stop going, I like the technology, because we realize that our film in Uganda, there are no television stations that would certainly run it. There's not going to be any movie theaters. So we knew that, first of all, that the film would be hard to distribute and it would take a long time to produce it. So we chose right up front to do the interviews and edit them down to small 1 and 2 minute long lengths that we put up on the internet. Because the Ugandans get their internet on the phone, and you can watch a 1 to 2 minute story on the phone. You really can. Because someone who's living up in the hinterlands or even on the border of the Congo, how are they going to reach that information? And for us, the important thing again was this is one Ugandan to another. It's not a white person. It's not a Westerner doing it. I never did any of the interviews because that would have really abridged the most basic fundamental thing. It had to be one Ugandan talking to another, so when a Ugandan watched that video, they would understand what was happening. That was implicit in it. So I think the technology shouldn't be shunned away from or shouldn't be shied away. Social media should be utilized. If we look at some of the revolutions that have happened, maybe not so successful, but certainly the Spring Awakening in the Middle East, etc., there's a variety of different technologies that should be used in that way. Additionally, the truth about Uganda is more than 60% of the population is under the age of 22. 60% under the age of 22. They're all about the social media. There's really no other way to reach them. So you go where it's necessary.
I'm not sure this is really an answer to your question, but I have felt in the past year or so, though I had gotten distracted by an interest, and I'm still interested in film and things that are more screen related, but I have felt a resurgence of my faith in the theater as a medium because the doors closed. Theoretically, everyone has turned off their cell phone, and it's really kind of a sacred space, I think, where, for me, it's sort of become, when I stopped going to Catholic church because I couldn't deal anymore, it has become in some ways that sacred space where people are in a room together, communicating with each other, and that time stuff sort of goes away. And either you're transported to a different time or you dig deeper into our time, but you're in that space without that noise from the media that the social network stuff that you're talking about. And I think that's been encouraging because a lot of times people in the theater are talking about how the theater's dead or dying or whatever, and I don't think it is. I don't think it ever will, actually, because it is the simplest form of storytelling that we've had since like the campfire, and I don't know, so I just hope I'm just going to continue to do that, I guess, is what I'm saying.
My one thing is that theater takes a while to develop, and it takes a while to get to a big audience. So in terms of making it immediate to keep up with social media and everything going on with that, I actually personally don't think that that's important. to like a big theatrical production or a musical, I more think looking at everything and looking at this, for lack of a better word, superficial mask that's on top, and really going, no, what's the pulse of it? What is it actually talking about? And then using that as a basis for it. I think that's totally different in my art form because it takes years to develop. But I'm also a huge history person, and that's why you realize that, like Joe was saying, these things repeat, and it sometimes is nice to take the details of something that can't change and use that as a basis for a story. Yeah.
Good morning. Thank you for all that you've shared so far. I've been really struck by that a lot of you have talked about empathy and listening and the importance of that in creating art, especially art that has a social commentary in it. But Tim, I was really struck in your introduction. You talked about how artists are trying to change your mind. Like that's why they're doing what they're doing. And in my own art and in a lot of the art that I interact with, I really struggle with having those two things live in the same room. How do you truly empathize and truly listen and let people be who they are, and also maybe try to change their mind with what you're doing? So I'd love to hear all of your perspectives on that.
Wow, okay. I think it's, if you are really empathetic and you're really communicating with another person, then that person has to be empathetic back with you, and that requires an exchange of information. And you really have to be changed by that. If you're not, then you're not human. And honestly, that's the simplest way I can express it. And regardless of how fearful you might be in the interaction, because in Uganda it's pretty dangerous to be there. It really, really is, and some really wild things have happened. But when you're at that moment and you're listening to that person and they realize that you're honestly listening to them, they tell you their heart. They really do. And when you watch that, it becomes apparent. And if you're going to change a society, let alone the world, you have to start off with one person. You have to encourage that person to be who they are, and the honesty of who they are will catch on to the next person who hears it, because that's what we did. It was a very difficult, long-term thing. It took 7 years to really travel all around Uganda. We most certainly were not just in the urban centers. We were way out in the rural, way out in the villages, where there was certainly no water, certainly no electricity, that sort of thing. And yet there we are. And that kind of story can still touch a person here in this country, if we open up to that. As an artist, I think that in some respects, you have to give yourself permission. We're all full of shame. We all curtail ourselves by shame. And as a gay man or a gay pothead, I know all about shame, okay? I'm like over it, okay? There ain't no room for it. When you say that to yourself, you honestly come from that place, because God knows, I really look this way in the middle of Africa. And don't you think I frighten them? Don't you think they're like, what is that? Okay? Well, I assure you, once I open my mouth and I talk and I listen, all that goes away, as well as it's done with you as well here today. Because certainly you had your ideas of who I was when you took a look, and now you got a completely different idea, I'm sure, because I have that honesty of self, and that's what you need to put in your art. And it's okay to know when you're being honest that you want to change someone. What else would we be alive for? To go along? I don't think so. It's always about change. The experience is relentlessly about change, which is why what Joe says is true. We must never give up. You always have to keep that fight going. And the only way I can enrich the world around me and myself is to create art out of that.
Yeah, truth. It's a truth. It's a bottom line truth to dialogue. We're having this conversation now. You ask the question, we internalize, we're trying to give you an honest answer back. That's where the problem lies. We make it. Doesn't mean that even what I say, what I make, you'll take as what I'm trying to say. I've been in situations where I've had shows where I'm getting ready to show a show that's going to be interesting. It's called Proud to be an American. It's actually talking about me and my family and how we are still proud, even though this system is not a system that supports any minority. It does not, so you can still be proud at the same time that you don't like. I grew up in a a military family. You know, I respect and appreciate the flag. To see a Black Lives Matter situation change into, you know, all lives matter, purple lives matter, green lives matter, you know, Martian lives matter. It's frustrating, but that doesn't mean you stop. You continue to do it, but then it also makes it so you have to realize, look, you know, we're putting this out. That doesn't mean that what I'm putting out is going to be picked up, you know, and that's kind of what I was saying about the whole trying to find a new audience. But I think we also need to realize that as artists, as makers, we do get the opportunity to see things outside of the lens of our time. So we do look forward and back at the same time. And I think through that we can throw a little bit of intelligence out that says, here's the system again, folks. Is it really because, you know, you're anti-Trump or you're right or left? Do we only have two parties now and they're separated and we can be conquered and divided? Is our system flawed from the very beginning? Is the collegiate vote not respecting us as people, so when we go out and vote, it doesn't really matter? Are there the rights to be able to change borders and things so one party is better than the other? I question it. I question all that stuff. And I question those through my art, and I give it out there. Now, whether people actually see it and can pick that up and come back to me, that's up to them.
I understand that contradiction a lot. I mean, when we were in Colorado Springs and the story turned and we had to take on the whole Ted Haggard thing, I remember interviewing a young woman who, she and her husband lived in this apartment building, and they were basically in the apartment building to sort of proselytize to people and try to get people in the apartment building to become evangelicals. But they were in their early 20s. They were lovely. They were lovely people. And the first time I interviewed her, she told me that her best friend was gay, and I said, do you have a problem with the fact that she's going to burn into hell for all eternity according to your religious belief? And she sort of flushed from her chest to her forehead, and she said, I try not to think about it. And so she lives with that tension. I feel like we all have these contradictions inside us. The world has contradictions, and I guess part of it is just being open to conversation and trying to ratchet down the histrionics and, you know, make the conversation more of a dialogue than, you know, and that's sort of, I feel like my role as an artist is to try to bring empathy to some kind of, at least like turning down the volume so that people are actually like listening to each other.
So I think we have about 5 minutes left, and I've seen hands coming up over here, so I've neglected this side of the room.
Hello, good morning. I'm an aspiring lighting designer, and after hearing you talk today, I wonder, is it our responsibility as artists, akin to, say, a newsroom, to cultivate, maintain, and keep a informed audience, or will our art bring that audience that we want in?
I'm sorry.
Should we, as artists, strive to have I don't want to say an agenda, but a message in our art, or should we have our art be a message?
I think that can be tricky sometimes because you don't want to ostracize an audience, or at least part of an audience. I think that there should be a reason you do it. There should be something in you that says, I value truth, and therefore that's why I'm telling the story. Or I value equality, and that's why I'm telling the story. But having an agenda that says, I want to do this to a person, I think can sometimes be constraining, especially when you're storytelling. I think that's all I have.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to agree. And I think you're saying also, do we have a responsibility to inform? Is that your question? I mean, I think yes, to some degree. I mean, in terms of documentary theater, absolutely. I mean, that's part of the mission, right? Is to inform about different perspectives on a certain issue or community. Absolutely. The question about whether or not, And I understand, and then I think the other side of your question is then, or do you wait for your art to draw people in? And I think it may just depend partly on what your medium is, right? And sort of, and what your purpose is on a specific project.
I think it's inherent in the process. I think that the two are the same. I think that we all embody the art, we're all the artists personally, and if we all look at each one of us as artists, which we all are, then we have our own personal situation in which we should be moving things forward. And then it turns into somewhat of a tribal type of situation, and we move the thing as a group, not as an individual. I don't think that individually that I can do anything bigger than what we can do collectively as a group. And so I think that's what happens. The women's movement is going to change our lives from what it is. The gay movement is going to change our life from what it is. Civil rights movements that happened in the past have changed our lives and are going to continue to change our lives. The question is whether or not the system in which we work with, as far as I'm concerned, is willing to accept us as individuals.
Last question, take my take it.
Hi, I am really loving this panel. You have my juices going big time. And I also am touched how each one of you is able to weave together the personal and the political and the creative. It just feels so important to me that all of that is included. I have a specific question for Tim. I'm wondering how you market your work. For me personally, I'd like to, do I just Google your name and see it? But also, how do you market to those rural people in Uganda that you want to reach?
That's really a profound question. That's exactly where we're at right now. We've determined that, the film again is comprised of those little pieces of the video interviews that we did. We rearranged them and turned them into a film, and the film is 40 minutes long. And that's too long and too much money for a person to watch on their phone. They can't get that. So we have a network of groups that we're piggybacking on top of. There's a group called SMUG, Sexual Minorities Uganda, which is the umbrella group for all the gay groups around the country, even way out in the rural areas. So what we're doing is we're going to be creating DVDs, because everybody in Uganda has a DVD player and access to a television. So that's the way we're going to be able to do that and go back into those very areas, and especially to the people that we interviewed with. We've shown them all the interviews that we did with them before we even posted them up on the internet. They got to review them, and every person who interviewed with us got to say, yes, you can put my name out there, because they are literally risking their lives. And at the last minute, some people chose not to, so we didn't. Our approach is to really reinforce the existing political network of SMUG and to really let Ugandans reinforce and help themselves. What we'll do is go around the country and drop off at least 1,000 different DVDs. And that will flood them with that information, and hopefully we'll intentionally send them to the homophobes as well, because we want them to see what it is, because what they will do then is be able to talk on the media by downing the film, which will get people to understand the film exists. Since it's the only way I know how to get around censors, right? Get them to do your work for you. But mostly it's each of those people. I just can't get out of my mind watching them. Their lives, their eyes, their faces would light up when they finally got to tell a story about themselves to someone else and know that they're going to help another Ugandan. Thank you for the question.
Thank you. So I think that brings us to the end of our time for this session. Before we wrap up and head to lunch, I just want to make sure that you check out the test tube lounge in the lobby. The Tech Council is out here to your left, and definitely worth a visit. But Joe, Tim, Allison, and Peter, thank you so much for your time. Thank you all.
I have the best selfie on.